Every autumn, I try to have a project as part of Remembrance Day to remember those who served in the Canadian military to preserve our freedom. This year, I chose Flight Sergeant Victor Dadson for this project. Victor was the only son of Alfred and Edith Dadson, who were very good friends of my maternal grandparents. There's not a whole lot of information on what Victor did in World War II, but there is just enough to give an idea of the Royal Canadian Air Force's role in World War II. Our story begins with this newspaper clipping dated from 1941, in which it is said that Victor has received his wings from No. 7 Service Flying Training School in McLeod, Alberta. The town of Fort McLeod is located 173 kilometers south of Calgary. And No. 7 Service Flying Training School was part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan in World War II. The British Commonwealth Air Training Plan was created by the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand during the Second World War to train air crews in Canada for service with the RAF in Britain. Canada was chosen for this role due to its suitable weather, wide open spaces ideal for extensive flight and navigation training, closeness to the United States industrial centers and supplies of fuel, and also the lack of any threat from enemy aircraft, and its proximity to the European theater of war. At the Bomber Command Museum of Canada in Nanton, Alberta, there were some very well done models of what these flight training bases looked like this one of No. 5 Flight Training School in High River, Alberta, and included miniatures of the standard Canadian trainer aircraft, the de Havilland Tiger Moth trainer, on which budding Air Force pilots first learned to fly. For many of these young men, getting in the cockpit of the Tiger Moth was the first time they had seen an aircraft, then alone tried to fly one. And so, unfortunately, accidents were not uncommon, and many a young man's Air Force career ended in a Canadian graveyard, far from home. The single-engine Tiger Moth is a much simpler aircraft than the massive multi-engine Avro Lancaster bomber, and would require a pilot to have additional training to fly it. And so, after Victor Dadson received his initial flight training at one of the elementary flight training schools, possibly No. 16 Elementary Flying School in his hometown of Edmonton, Alberta, he was sent to No. 7 Flight Training School in Fort McLeod for advanced training on the multi-engine Avro Allison aircraft. And according to the Edmonton Bulletin, it was here that he was awarded his flying wings as a qualified pilot. With that, Victor's time in Canada came to an end, and he was sent to Britain to join Bomber Command, an RCAF 408 Squadron. The late 1930s and into the autumn of 1941 found Nazi Germany on a wild march to world conquest. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece had all fallen to the German blitzkrieg, and Germany held vast parts of the Soviet Union. Since Britain is an island, the German blitzkrieg was stopped on the northern coast of France unable to advance without launching an amphibian landing of Britain that was not possible until the Luftwaffe achieved air superiority, which the RAF denied by the narrowest of margins during the Battle of Britain. The British had managed to save a sizable part of her army during the evacuation of Dunkirk, but only at the cost of leaving most of their equipment behind. In addition, the North Africa campaign began drawing the limited resources of the army there until mid-1943. So, during this part of World War II, Britain was safe for the time being from invasion, as Hitler turned his attention away from Britain towards the Soviet Union. But her army was a spent force, unable to man sizable operations on the European continent until it rebuilt. The only force capable at the time of hitting Nazi Germany in a meaningful way was the RAF and Bomber Command. Therefore, the RAF launched a major strategic aerial bombing offensive against Nazi Germany, aimed at destroying its war industry, disrupting transportation, and breaking civilian morale. Initially, in 1940-41, the British strived for precision daytime bombing of strictly military and industrial targets, but heavy losses to German fighters and anti-aircraft fire forced the RAF to switch to a strictly nighttime raids. Another problem with precision bombing was that bomb sight technology was still very primitive in World War II, and smart bomb technology to guide bombs to their target once dropped was still 30 or more years in the future. This meant that bombs were often scattered far from their intended target. A study at the time found that only about 5% of dropped bombs landed within 5 miles or 8 kilometers of their target, and nearly half fell in open country. In February 1942, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris took over Bomber Command and switched from precision targeting to area bombing of entire German industrial cities.
The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and half 100 other places, they put that rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
From 1943 onwards, the RAF joined the United States Air Force in a round-the-clock bombing offensive. The U.S. Air Force conducted precision daylight raids, while the RAF continued mass night raids. This policy of carpet bombing German cities has made Arthur Harris one of the most controversial figures of World War II, as this policy led to the destruction of entire German cities with massive civilian casualties. Now that we've learned a little bit about Bomber Command and about the training Flight Sergeant Dadson would have received in Canada with the Commonwealth Flight Training Plan, let's take a look at some of the aircraft he would have flown with RCAF 408 Squadron in Britain. During World War II, RCAF 408 Squadron flew the Hampton, the Halifax, and the Lancaster bombers. They started with the Hampton, then converted to the Halifax in late 1942, which was followed by flying the Lancaster bomber in early 1943. After a Google search of Flight Sergeant Victor Dadson's name, I learned the aircraft he flew was the HP-52 Hampton. The Handley Page HP-52 Hampton is a British twin-engine medium bomber that was operated by the Royal Canadian Air Force. 1,430 were built between 1936 to 1941, and the type was retired from service in 1943. The Hampton crew consisted of the pilot, navigator, bomb aimer, radio operator, and rear gunner. The Hampton's flying qualities were typically described as being favorable. The pilot was provided with a high level of external visibility, which assisted in the tight maneuvers required on missions. But otherwise, due to its very narrow fuselage, the crews described the Hampton as a beautiful airplane to fly, but terrible to fly in. They described it as cramped, with no heat, no facilities where you could relieve yourself. You got in there and you were stuck for the entire mission. With the outbreak of war in 1939, the Hamptons were used for daytime armed aerial reconnaissance, but proved no match for the Luftwaffe fighters and were moved to nighttime operations only. After the German invasion of Norway in 1940, the Hamptons were sent on night mine-laying operations in the North Sea in areas deemed unsuitable by British shipping, and participated in the early nighttime raids on German soil. The Hamptons were replaced by the Halifax and Lancaster bombers in 1943. From 1941 to 1945, the British aircraft manufacturer Avro built 7,377 Lancaster bombers, and 430 of them were constructed in Canada. Out of this total, 3,932 Lancasters were destroyed in World War II, 3,249 lost in action, and another 487 from ground accidents. When the Lancaster became surplus after the war, they were sold at bargain basement prices for scrap and other uses, including being used as cheap farm storage buildings and chicken coops. Today, only 17 complete Lancaster bombers still exist, and of that number, only 2 are still flight-worthy. One of them at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, and the other with the Royal Air Force's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight in the UK. At the beginning of October this year, I drove down from my home in Edmonton to visit 2 of these Lancasters, in Calgary at the Hangar Flight Museum and in Nanton at the Bomber Command Museum of Canada. I knew the Lancaster was a large aircraft, but it wasn't until I was beside one that it struck me just how large they were. I was particularly impressed by the size of the bomb bay, which takes up almost the entire length of the plane. On raids over Germany, the Lancaster was the bomber capable of carrying the largest bomb payloads of any bomber in World War II, and there were a number of different bomb combinations typically carried and dropped on these missions. But the bomb load I found the most disturbing, due to the destruction it caused, was this one, consisting of a 4,000-pound cookie bomb and 12 small bomb containers. Each small container could hold 236 4-pound or 24 30-pound incendiary or explosive incendiary bombs for a staggering load of 2,832 incendiary bombs made of magnesium and filled with thermite per bomber. The 4,000-pound cookie high explosive bomb was designed to blow off the roofs and shatter the windows on buildings, allowing the incendiary bombs to enter and set off several fires. The 200 and 500-pound bombs dropped by the other bombers would then blast apart the buildings, spreading the fires even further. This set off firestorms in several German cities, killing thousands of civilians. I guess this was necessary but I still find it to be very disturbing. During my visit to the Bomber Command Museum in Nanton, Alberta, I saw some of the specialty bombs carried by the Lancaster bomber in World War II, such as this display of the famous bouncing bomb used on the Dam Buster raid in May 1942. And seen in this photograph from the period, mounted below a Lancaster bomber. The bomb was rotated at high speed before being dropped and bounced over all the anti-torpedo nets before striking and destroying the various dams in the German Ruhr Valley. The museum also had mock-ups of the Tall Boy and Grand Slam bombs, which were the largest conventional bombs used in World War II and were only capable of being carried by the Lancaster bomber due to their immense size. These bombs were used against hardened targets, such as the U-boat pens on the French coast. The bombs were designed to crash through several feet of concrete before exploding and did tremendous damage to the U-boat pens. These bombs were also known as earthquake bombs, and it wasn't always necessary to directly hit the target to destroy it. A near miss would send tremors through the ground, heaving up the foundations of bridges and buildings, causing them to collapse. In World War II, just over 17,000 men served in Bomber Command. In the early part of the war, bomber crews were expected to complete 25 missions before rotating out of Bomber Command to a safer role. But later that went up to 30 missions, and then later on 35 missions. Some crews, upon completing their tour, elected to sign up for a second tour, so we even had more missions. Very often, a bomber crew only completed around 10 missions before being shot down. Over the duration of World War II, Bomber Command had a death rate of about 62%, and that doesn't include those who were injured or were taken prisoner in Germany after they were shot down. In a small park just outside the front door of the Bomber Command Museum of Canada in Nanton, Alberta, is a memorial with 10,643 names on it of those killed while serving in Bomber Command in World War II. Recently, I learned a fun fact about this memorial that tells of a happy fate for one man in Bomber Command. A photo was selected to engrave on the memorial to symbolize all the men who served in Bomber Command. In this photo was the pilot, Flight Lieutenant Robert Clothier, who flew 45 to 55 combat missions over occupied Europe with Bomber Command in 408 Squadron. He survived the war and returned to Canada. Starting in 1972, Robert Clothier starred as the lovable villain Relic on The Beachcombers, one of the most successful Canadian television series of all time, that ran for 387 episodes over 18 years until 1990. Mr. Clothier passed away from a stroke on February the 10th, 1999, at the age of 77. Unfortunately, Flight Sergeant Victor Dadson didn't have as happy an ending. On January the 25th, 1942, a Handley Page HP-52 Hampton, piloted by Flight Sergeant Dadson, departed from RAF North Lothingham. Shortly after takeoff, the plane went into an uncontrolled dive and crashed within 10 kilometers from the airport. All 4 crew members on board were killed. Flight Sergeant Victor Charles Dadson is buried in the Royal Tunbridge Wells Cemetery in Kent, United Kingdom. His name appears on one of the panels of the Bomber Command Memorial. and on page 68 of the World War II Book of Remembrance, kept in the Peace Tower of the Parliament of Canada. This tale about the RCAF and Bomber Command in World War II is now complete. Till we meet it again, everyone keep safe and well.